Hello and welcome to On the Record Season 4. It's been 19 weeks now since we witnessed the destruction of Hurricane Dorian, and for many the horror lives on. While roads and public spaces have been cleared, hospitals, schools and other essential government agencies are still not functional on the two affected islands. With the introduction of a new ministry, the creation of an authority and $1.5 billion pledged in donations, we now ask, how do we ensure we properly manage these funds and the resources? On our season opener of On the Record, we're looking at building a bigger, better Bahamas with our guest, Managing Director of the Bahamas Disaster Reconstruction Authority, Katherine Forbes-Smith. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
Check. So all you've been doing on this court was traveling. When you see me travel to go watch my free NBA pass game, I can come back harder, smoke it, spicy.
Free NBA pass.
You know what we have doing? Each month they send a lucky customer on an all-expense-paid trip to the States to watch a game. And even if you don't win that, you could have a local experience because they can pay for all your food and drinks and participate in bars, so you still can have a good time, bro.
I could get in on that.
All you have to do is sign up for Trio and you enter the drawing. Rare, don't lie.
Get denied like this guy, make sure you come through in the clutch. Sign up for Trio and be a Rev NBA All-Star. Guarantee your chance to win a free trip to an NBA game every month when you sign up for Trio today. Call 601-8992. Terms and conditions apply. Rev, you and us together.
And welcome back to our program. This Monday, the government and the United Nations Development Program, with the support from governments like the United States and the United Kingdom, staged a pledge conference to assist with the mobilizing of resources and technical support for the recovery efforts. From that conference, $1.5 billion was pledged to assist with rebuilding Abaco and Grand Bahama, not just to their original state, but ensuring that they are built resilient, strong, and sustainably. Prime Minister Hubert Minnis reminded us of the mandate given to the authority responsible for this task.
The authority has much work to do and is working to boost their capacity in a number of areas. They are working through unnecessary bottlenecks, and they have been given the mandate and the flexibility to act decisively, directly, and quickly. They have been given the mandate to remove all the obstructive bureaucratic government procedures that we have been challenged with so long before. They have been given the mandate to rebuild Abaco even better than New Providence.
Well, in studio now with me is the Managing Director of the Bahamas Disaster Reconstruction Authority, Katherine Forbes-Smith. Kate, welcome to On the Record. I think this is your first time in... It's your first time, I think it's your first time in studio with us.
No. I was here with GirlCon.
Oh, yes. We were in Grand Bahama then, though. Yeah. Well, welcome to our studio. A Happy New Year to you. And I'm happy to say that we're starting off our season with you this year, and it's important to us. We ended the season talking about the recovery. We spent a lot of time in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian just going in and looking at the work that was being done to bring some normalcy to these communities. But we are now at a different stage, and that is the rebuilding effort. And I, first of all, want to talk about what the roles and responsibilities are of this authority that you now head.
Well, thank you, Jerome, and Happy New Year to you and your team here at our news and certainly On the Record. But as the clip that you showed with the Prime Minister indicated that the authority, the Disaster Reconstruction Authority is the official name, our responsibility is really to act as the coordinating agency for this reconstruction and rebuilding effort in the country. And really what that means is the board of directors, with our chairman and myself as the chief operating officer responsible for the operations of the Disaster Authority, we are given the mandate, as the PM indicated, to move this rebuilding effort as quickly as we can. I think you can appreciate that when you have a disaster like the one we had, we could get tied down in a lot of government bureaucracy that's not going to be good for the country, it's not going to be good for our economy, it's not going to be good for the people of the Bahamas. And so everything to do with this rebuilding, whether it's contracts, whether it's the employment of people, technical people, experts that we may need to assist us, we have the mandate to drive this rebuilding effort.
Now, what kinds of bureaucracy and red tape do you think are already in place or could be impediments to moving the process forward, which you are now mandated to do away with?
Well, for example, obviously the authority has to build capacity and start staffing. Obviously, our program is we want to keep the cost, the administrative cost of the authority, as the Act states, our administrative costs in terms of salary and benefits and how we operate should not be more than 20% of our budget. So, for example, we have to hire people, and there will be some people that we hire on contract. However, there will be some employees that we would really need to be seconded from other ministries within the government. And that's going to be difficult because obviously the authority will want to get the best and brightest of Bahamians to work in this effort. Obviously, there will be ministries who will not want to allow their best and brightest to leave. So we're going to have to find a happy medium there. And just the whole bureaucracy of normal government issues, you know, how long it takes even to pay a bill. You know, we're going to be moving quickly. Services are going to be needed. We can't, you know, expect to keep people back just because of, you know, the payment process sometimes in government could be very tedious and long. I've already certainly had those issues early on in the early relief with NEMA. So, you know, there's just a whole lot of bureaucracy we just don't need as we move forward.
Is this, I guess, you know, people are asking, you know, why wasn't this done earlier, or what's taken us so long, or, you know, how did we arrive at this point, at this juncture? I mean, has it taken government and all these folks this long to be able to get us to this point? Because that's one of the issues that people have. It seems that things are moving slowly. Well,
first of all, let me just say that you realize that there was a new ministry that was formed, okay? So the ministry came on. That took some time in terms of writing the appropriate act to govern the ministry. Then after that, you had the Disaster Reconstruction bill that became an act that had to also pass through the Houses of Parliament. So the authority really took office December 1st. We probably lost 2 weeks in December as a result of the holidays. But we are vigorously on the road trying to move as quickly as we can. And really, the reason for that, Jerome, in the next 5 months, we're right at the beginning of the hurricane season, and we really need to make sure that persons are back into their homes as best we can, particularly those persons with minor and medium damages. Not to say that we're not focusing on those persons who have major damage or even persons who have destroyed homes. But the point is, there's no reason why we cannot move persons back or help them get back in their homes who have minimal damage and medium damage.
So now we've got this new ministry, we have this authority, we have NEMA. It would seem now there may be some overlap. You've got this ministry, you're now heading the authority, and NEMA, of course, is the agency that we all know that's been heading all of this. How do you all, you know, how does it all, what's the outlay? Who reports to who? And how do you ensure that there's not a lot of overlapping, because it seems that you all are charged with similar things?
Well, first of all, the ministry itself, the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, is the ministry that has 2 departments in it. And this is how I explain it, because I believe people can understand that. So you have this overall ministry, 2 departments, NEMA being one, the authority being one. NEMA's role does not change in terms of disaster preparedness, training around the country, making sure that we have the teams on the ground in every island in the Bahamas who are trained and prepared if a disaster should hit. NEMA is still responsible for early recovery, early relief, mitigation. That's NEMA's role. And soon NEMA will have to return to what NEMA is supposed to be doing at this point, which is preparing for the next disaster, which does not necessarily have to be a hurricane. It could be anything.
I'm glad you said that, because I think some people forget that
no.
their job is to deal with any disaster.
Any disaster. So that's NEMA's role. Obviously, there's a slight overlapping when we talk about early relief and early recovery. So I call it Recovery 1, Recovery 2. So NEMA, in terms of the recovery role in what I call Recovery 1, would have been temporary housing, for example, and that's where it cuts off. Now we're talking about Recovery 2. We're talking about rebuilding. We're talking about how we look at persons who have been displaced in terms of housing. So the authority's role is reconstruction and rebuilding. That is not NEMA's role, and therein lies the big difference. The ministry itself and the minister's role is to set government policy as an overarching ministry. So whatever the government's policies are, NEMA and the authority, to a certain degree, has to follow policy direction. Now, we have an authority that has a chairman, has a managing director, and has a board of directors. We do have the autonomy as an authority to, as I said earlier, to be able to run the authority and run the affairs of the authority without direction necessarily from any government ministry telling the authority how you should let contracts, telling the authority how you should hire individuals, or telling the authority what decision one should make when it comes to temporary housing or how we should build back. The authority through the board has the full autonomy to do its job, and that's really the difference.
So, in essence, you have this now authority that does not have to take direction from any ministry or minister?
Correct. The Minister for Disaster Preparedness and Management, as I said, sets policy, but does not get down into the weeds of telling the authority that you have to hire this person, you have to let this contract to this individual. That's not the role of the minister.
And you mentioned the chairman, board of directors. Who are the individuals that now comprise this authority?
Well, first of all, according to the Act, there are 12 members that you can have that sits on the board. There are 5 government members, which would, well, necessarily be those appointed, the chairman, the deputy chairman. The chairman is John Michael Clark, who most people would know in a very technical arena as a quantity surveyor, engineer. Then you have Algernon Cargill, who is the deputy chairman, who within himself has had several positions and known as a business person in the community. The managing director is an ex officio member of the board. You have the permanent secretary for the ministry that sits on the board. And then you have a representative from NEMA, and in this case, it's the director of NEMA. So those are the 5 government people that you can say is on the board. Government to the extent that the chairman and deputy chairman are appointed. Then you have 7 other members. So you have persons who represent the Chamber of Commerce in Abaco, Ken Hutton. You have Fred Gottlieb, who is an attorney who also was based in Abaco before he himself was displaced. And then you have Jeremy Sweeting, who is a local government councillor in the Abaco, representing the Keys and some parts of the mainland, I believe. So what you have there are 3 individuals with different skill sets that are on the ground and knows the Abaco community
Any
very
of those
well.
you mentioned, it seems to be heavy on the Abaco side. What about Grand Bahama?
Well, I was just going to get to that.
Okay.
Well, first of all, as the managing director is from Grand Bahama.
Okay.
And then you have Wendell Grant from Grant Engineers, who is a structural and civil engineer. We also have, who else? I think we have Whitney from BPL, who represents the energy sector on the board as well. You have Maria Ferrer, who is an accountant,
Okay.
on the board.
So these are really professionals who come from the private sector.
Correct.
And that's not something you always see in government. Not that people in government aren't professionals, but a lot of times we find these authorities are made up of people who are pulled from other areas from government, but you seem to have gotten a lot of private sector folks involved.
Well, I think it's necessary. I think this rebuilding requires a particular skill set. And so it's very important for us to attract people to the board that have that kind of skill set. I also want to talk a little bit after the break on the technical committees and area committees.
Will do. Okay, so we're going to, at the point of our first break, stay with us. Our discussion continues on the record right after this.
Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so it's about the low value of contingent in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
More on the record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand Lukine is a hot subject in the news. We're going to...
This portion of On the Record brought to you by Generali, your employee benefits solutions provider.
You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. In this segment, it's brought to you by Generali. Thank you for staying with us. I'm joined by Katherine Forbes-Smith, Managing Director of the Bahamas Disaster Reconstruction Authority. We now take you to a clip that we put together that helps to put into context what this segment is going to be discussing.
The message is not simply to go forth and erect the same structures we had before. This call is not for us to keep the status quo, but for us to be more innovative and holistic in our approach to rebuilding.
Heard were that of Christelle Rutherford Ferguson. She's the chairman of the board of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employees Confederation. She spoke at the pledge conference on Monday. A very important message in that we are not going to continue with the status quo. Part of the way forward, and one of the things that was discussed in that conference on Monday, was that we're not just building back, but we're building back communities that are resilient. Why is that such an important message for us right now?
Well, first of all, Jerome, when you look at the several hurricanes that have impacted the Bahamas, and in particular Grand Bahama and Abaco, it's very obvious that we cannot afford to build the same way that we built before. And all we did in previous hurricanes, like for example the airport in Freeport or maybe some of the public structures, we just simply built back.
Same area,
same thing, and you get the same results, right? Which is devastation. What in my talk with many of the donors, for example, and many people who've been involved in disasters like this, and even worse, they've said that most donors are interested in supporting, but they want to support something that's fresh and new, and they want to be a part of things that are resilient. And so really just on that message, we should be thinking differently. Also, as Bahamians and as a country, and for the future sustainability of this country for our children and grandchildren, we've got to protect what we have. And so building back better and building back with a level of resiliency makes sense. If we're not going to do it, we may as well close up shop now and move on.
What are some of the things that you can say that we are doing differently, that you know for sure we are not going to do that again?
Well, first of all, let's first move some people or some structures out of the way. People whose homes got minimal damage or medium damage and weren't destroyed, you can't expect them to knock their homes down and start over. What you would hope to do, that what they would do would consider in their own renovation, because some of these things are just a big renovation program because of the damages that they would have received. So you would expect that maybe they would consider, hurricane impact windows and doors and just those small things that can make a difference, right? Those persons whose houses were destroyed totally, government buildings, schools, clinics that were destroyed, we have to look at what is the height above the ground? How much, are we going to go up on these homes and businesses, public structures, the airport in Freeport? What are we doing with the Fishing Hole Road? How are we going to look at that now? Because obviously, everything that has been done up to this point has not worked. That's very obvious.
Built a whole new highway, a whole new causeway.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I know I was talking to somebody in the technical field who said we keep talking about putting asphalt road, which is that service road next to the Fishing Hole Road, and they're saying it should be concrete. Why do we keep doing asphalt? I mean, it's obvious it washes away, eh? So all these little things. And, there's a lot of information out there about how we can build back with a little bit more resiliency. I was in Abaco the other day when someone told me, just look at some of the roofs that have not been totally destroyed. A little, and Carlos Palacios spoke to it, a little $2 strap for the roof. People are not putting on their roofs. So there's a lot of things that we can do differently, and I think we need to.
One of the interesting things that I discovered in the conference when the director of Public Works, Melanie Roach, spoke about some of the damage, she said if you looked at it, a lot of structures just did not meet up to the building codes and building requirements. But now this brings into force the question of enforcement.
Right.
Because the codes are there, even though I think it's about maybe 14, 15 years since we've updated the codes. But if the codes are there and we aren't enforcing them, what's the point?
Well, the point is after a Category 5 storm, somebody needs to think a little bit differently. So if people are employed to enforce and inspect, and they are not doing what they're supposed to do, then we have to reconsider who is inspecting and who is enforcing. I mean, that's an easy fix.
Good point. Now, are we involving the expertise of coastal engineers, environmental partners, to ensure that we have this innovative and holistic approach in the rebuilding?
Absolutely, and I was just going to address that when we took the break. When you look at the Act has something in it that speaks to disaster area zones, and on those committees, they're called area committees in these disaster zones. And these committees is exactly where those persons would be. Very technical, environmentalists, coastal engineers, other structural and civil engineers. There is a space for a whole lot of technical support according to this Act, and we are actually in the process of building capacity there right now.
And are these technical folks just Bahamian, or are we looking to get in some international expertise as well? The reality is we never have enough expertise, particularly in specific areas like this.
Oh, for sure. Right now, we have a company called Witts O'Brien, who is a subsidiary of Secor International, and they are offering some consulting services to the authority right now. And if you check their background, they are a very reputable company. They've been involved in many disasters. I know one of the persons that I deal with on a daily basis has been involved with 9/11 in New York, has been involved in another, I think he is in the U.S. Virgin Islands now. So there are a number of groups that are at the moment giving pro bono services, but obviously we know at the end of the day we have to look for some international consultants who have the ability to work with our Bahamian team and helping us make good decisions. But one of the things that the authority is very cognizant of, we want to hire as many Bahamians as we can because we do have a lot of good local talent in this country. Obviously, we'd want to match them also with some international people who have some experience in disaster preparedness and certainly reconstruction and rebuilding. So I think a good mix is there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we understand that in order to get expertise and to get these kinds of consultancies, these things cost money? The reason I bring that up is because we're talking about taking in donations. We want monies to rebuild, and people are looking at reconstruction. But then you say, hey, I need to pay a firm $50,000 for consulting. People go, shouldn't that money go towards helping to rebuild? I mean, do you think there is enough of an understanding of what these things really cost?
Maybe not, but I think as long as the authority does what it's supposed to do, and that is to be very transparent to the Bahamian people and to our international donors, who we have an obligation to be transparent to as well, I don't think we will run into difficulties. I do know that we have companies who are operating in the Bahamas who recognize that technical support is necessary, and some of these local companies are assisting us today, and they want to support us by giving us consultants and technical support.
There's a $20 million outlay for a post-Dorian environmental remediation project. I want to talk to that and why that is so important and is tied to the overall work that's being done.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, why is that important? You're talking about environmental remediation.
Right.
Let's talk about what that is and why that's important.
Well, let me tell you why it's important, because after a hurricane like this, if you just go to Abaco, and in some places in Grand Bahama, like East Grand Bahama, that was heavily hit, you have a lot of debris. And that debris is mixed up with hazardous material, organics that we probably could use, electronics, appliances, and there's a need, first of all, for us to segregate that debris properly. You know and I know that when you mix up hazardous materials and whatever, it starts all kinds of things. And so we need to work with our environmentalists on that. And that kind of expenditure people may see as a large expense, but we've got to reserve the country after all of this debris.
There's even consideration being given, coral reefs being restored, forests being reconstructed. Again, a part of the environment. Why are these things so important?
Well, because of our tourism industry. I mean, we are known for our waters. People want to come here to see our coral structures and forestry as well. There are some sites that people really come to the Bahamas to see from a nature point of view. So from a tourism point of view, we've got to make sure that we preserve these areas as well.
Does the authority have direct contact with the Equinor group in Grand Bahama?
Yes.
And what is the status on the cleanup there? We know that there was a large oil spill as a result of the hurricane, specifically into the forest nearby. I think the waters, for the most part, were not as impacted. But can you update us on sort of where they are with that cleanup effort?
Oh, absolutely. The chairman and I have met with a team from Equinor, and they have done a tremendous job in the cleanup. The forestry has been impacted in the surrounding areas, and they are doing a lot of work in trying to preserve what is there and clean up what's left of the forestry. But they have a big team. They have a number of consultants working. I know that the Ministry of Health and the Environment has, through the minister, has also been in many discussions with Equinor. And if you go to East Grand Bahama and you knew what that oil spill looked like a day after the hurricane, and you go there now, you can see substantial work has been done. Now, the authority is also going to continue to watch that cleanup, because we need to make sure, at ground level, that there has really been no impact. And so part of our technical team that we will be hiring, and some will be working for us in terms of donating their services, we are actually going to put a team to work with the Equinor group as well.
We are at the point of our latest break in the show. Stay with us. We are into a discussion now on rebuilding bigger and better in the Bahamas. The show continues right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Listen, what is more dangerous than corruption?
We've got to move very quickly. Let's wrap up.
It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Thanks for watching. In studio, Katherine Forbes-Smith, Managing Director of the Disaster Reconstruction Authority. Thanks for staying with us tonight. Well, during the recent pledge conference held just Monday, $1.5 billion would have been pledged to assist with the rebuilding efforts of Grand Bahama and Abaco. However, it was later clarified that at least $975 million of that would be a loan.
We provide a complete design, build, finance solution. And so what that looked like is, rather than the government trying to come up with money to rebuild critical infrastructure, critical facilities, we provide 100% of the capital. So we go in, we design it, we build it, and we finance it. And we typically deliver that back to the government on a low interest rate, long-term lease. And at the end of the lease, they purchase the facility for $1. And so what that allows the government to do is to get critical facilities delivered quickly, but without going against the national debt. So it doesn't count against the national debt because we don't require the government to pledge their credit behind the obligation. But what's really most important about our model is that we provide technical expertise and capital to rebuild these communities, but we use local resources. So our goal is to always leave at least 85 cents of every dollar that's deployed on a project to leave that within the local community so that the citizens have a part in rebuilding their community, and it reflects their values and what they want to see. So it's a good model.
Following that interview and clarification, there has been a lot of public commentary, anxiety, even criticism of this loan facility. People were saying it was not made clear at the pledge conference that some of these monies were being pledged in loans and even technical assistance. Let's now, begin to do a deep dive into this and to clarify. Why would government consider a project, and I think in your statements to the media, you said this is a project that is being considered. Why something like that, or why would government consider something like that?
Well, I think this rebuilding effort in the country is going to cost the government a lot of money. Despite the fact that we may be getting donors' money, or we have to raise funds as well, this rebuild, according to the IDB figures, is somewhere around $3.4 billion. Clearly, we're going to have to make some hard decisions on how we get to that number. And let's be clear, Jerome. There's been a lot of discussion about, maybe the government wasn't upfront with regards to what the $1.5 billion entailed. But the first thing we need to recognize is that the UNDP, along with the government, put on this conference. The UNDP is the agency, the implementing agency of this conference, and they're managing this conference like they manage all other conferences. So the other thing that happens is, based on their standard verification and re-verification process for pledge events like this, they will publish the names of each donor to the fund after deposits are made to the fund. I know that a press statement has gone out, and I don't think that there is no secret who pledged, because people stood to their feet with a microphone and pledged publicly what they were lending or what they were offering. And so I just want to say on this matter, first of all, the $1.5 billion is not just cash, it's in-kind, it's technical support, it's a whole lot of things. And I think that we should be respectful of people who have pledged, because it's almost as if we're saying that something sinister is wrong here. And I don't think anybody was trying to hide anything.
Well, why do you think people feel like they were misled?
because, first of all, I don't think, this is the first time we've had a pledge conference that I know about in the country. And I think people ordinarily would think, well, if you're pledging, it probably should be, okay, so you see 1.5 billion pledged, people assumed it was probably cash. I listened to a number of other interviews where people understood it was cash and technical support. And I just think that's just how people perceived it. But I think that in the coming days, particularly if you read the release that was sent out last night, is very clear. It's the policy of UNDP. If someone stands up and pledges something, as far as they're concerned, once that pledge comes in as a definitive pledge and you receive it, then they would announce it.
So let's talk a little bit, if you can. And I know this whole deal with P3 is still on the table.
Of course.
And I always make it clear to people that you have to be, if I use the Bahamian term, circumspect in how you discuss these things. But why would a facility like this that D. Brown spoke to, why would a facility like this benefit the Bahamas at a time like this? Coming in and setting up all of these things as a loan facility, but as he laid out, eventually being owned by the government.
Well, let's look at it. And I'm no financial expert, and I'm
Sure.
not going to proceed to be. But from what I understand, it's the kind of facility where they design, they build, they finance, they turn it back over to the government when it's done, and it doesn't go against the government's credit. The government does not have to pledge its credit against this, right? So obviously that might be interesting, and that's all I can say about it. But I've also said to people who kept asking me about this and other pledges, if someone pledges something to you, do you have to really take everything that they pledge? I mean, it really, at the end of the day, you have to do what is in the best interest of the country and the people. And I think in this particular case, this $975 million, which he clearly said is a design, build, finance, and doesn't go against the government's credit, is something that is interesting enough for us to obviously look at. And I believe that the authority, I know John Michael Clark had previous conversations with the P3 group, and I'm sure we will continue to have conversations with the P3 group, as well as many others who have pledged any kind of technical support, in-kind support.
With the public criticism and all that's followed, are we in danger of turning people off? I mean, if I'm pledging to help and I'm here to help, and I'm looking at this, I may not even be involved, but as a donor, I may take a step back now looking at all of this and saying, right, do I really want to get involved?
Well, I mean, that's a consideration. I think that, donors are very much tuned into what's going on in the Bahamas, because this is a disaster zone and people want to help. There are also people who are offering services that benefit them as well, but also benefits the country. So yes, I believe donors will probably take a second look and say, look, oh boy, what do I do? Is this going to be good for me? So we have to be careful. I think we have to be very careful what we're saying about people, how we're approaching this, and just be careful, because people are wanting to help, and it obviously is a benefit to some people as well. In the long run, it's a benefit to the country.
Would you consider, though, going forward, maybe looking at how we're communicating this information to the public? Do you think maybe you need to do a better job of communicating what these proposals are, what the donors may be, offering?
But I think also if you respect what the UNDP says, and they're a global group, and they have said that the way that they manage these pledging conferences, this is the first time I understand that the UNDP has gotten involved in a private sector donor conference. Normally, the conferences, the pledge conferences that they do are usually those that involve country-to-country kind of support, okay? So, maybe the way they handle a donor conference that involves the country is a little bit different than how you would handle the private sector, and maybe they're using the same principle. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, I suppose so, in terms of how we communicate. But their global position on how they deal with these conferences and pledges is when the pledges are pledged on the day of the conference, then they seek to follow up with these pledges, and when they come in as an official, I guess, tangible source, then they would announce that particular individual pledge. So like I said, I mean, they're the ones who really are the expert globally on how this runs.
Okay, it's no secret that I think we don't ever come out of the political season in the Bahamas, but a lot of the politics seems to be ratcheting up now. How is that affecting the work and even affecting the process? From where I sit a lot of times, I see things and I see straight through it on both sides. People using this disaster as a means to promote political agendas. Mm-hmm. How is that impeding your work?
Well, I'll tell you this. We've had an introductory board meeting. We've had 2 other board meetings. We now have another board meeting coming up. And the 12 people who are part of this board are so very concerned about the status of the country. Particularly, you talked about those 3 gentlemen who sit on this board who are from Abaco. You talked to a Wendell Grant and a Maria Ferrer. And an Algernon Allen even, and John Michael Clark.
Algernon Cargo.
I'm sorry, yes, Algernon Cargo. Let me not make that mistake. People are so serious about the work that the authority is doing. I know within that group, the politics doesn't come to play, okay? And I know that people see me as a political figure. But you know, when you look in the mirror and see yourself, and you know how you would act in a situation, don't assume that's how I'm gonna act. I'm very serious about this work. This work is taking me personally, as well as a lot of these other board members, a lot of time to do. And there is no place for politics in this work. We have to rebuild this country, and we have to make sure that we are fair to all citizens of this country. If there's some political agendas that are going to come, it isn't going to work with this board. I can tell you that.
What about externally? And people using these things as, and again, I say on both sides, using it as a political opportunity.
Oh yeah, that's why I think a lot of unnecessary discussion is going on in a very negative way about this pledge conference. Honestly, that's what I think it is. But everything is done in such a way to really, really rebuild this country and to help people. And that's what we should be focused on. We should not be focused on these little minute things that are going to affect the work of rebuilding the country.
Okay, thank you very much. I think on that note, we're going to go into the break. I just want to say, and I encourage, people all the time, we are all Bahamians. This disaster did not affect a political group or political side. It affected all the Bahamians, and even people who were not born here or are not even Bahamian citizens. It is affected. So on that note, we're going to take our break. Stay with us. Our final segment is right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. And we are back. This is our last segment. In studio with me this evening is Katherine Forbes-Smith, Managing Director of the Disaster Recovery Authority. At the pledge conference held this week, Prime Minister Minnis urged us all that we are now in a new territory, and that means we must make significant changes for the future.
We are in a new territory, which is often challenging, but can be rewarding if we rebuild stronger and better. We have to think and to act boldly and in new ways. Outdated mindsets and procedures which no longer serve the country will have to be jettisoned.
Are we going to see the kind of change that is necessary to get us through this and to build back better, as the theme of that conference stated?
I think so, because even all, and I mentioned this before, donors we have to be responsible with donor contributions. And the donors want to see more resiliency. I think the average Bahamian This was such a devastating experience, particularly in Abaco and Grand Bahama, particularly in East Grand Bahama, where you saw loss of lives, and also in the entire Abaco area, particularly central Abaco and Marsh Harbor area. I think people are driven and understand that we cannot build the same way we did, and I think people are looking forward to the authority in everything that we drive, that we make sure that we are actually building better and building with some level of resiliency. I think this disaster has so impacted people that the expectations are great.
I want us to use this final segment, though, to talk a little bit about some specifics. For instance, the power situation in East Grand Bahama. That community, or those communities, are still without power, and that's going to be a significant rebuild. Is that going to be, is Grand Bahama Power going to rebuild, or does now BPL have to step in?
Well, as far as I know, and I am in communication with Dave McGregor, the CEO of the Grand Bahama Power Company, often. And a new development has occurred. And I think people need to understand something too. Prior to Hurricane Dorian, the Grand Bahama Power Company had just over 19,000 customers. To date, 17,000 plus customers have power in Grand Bahama. And so that's about 87% of restoration, and it's a good number, particularly when you think about what has happened in East Grand Bahama.
And I think Nasuvians don't always appreciate how far East Grand Bahama is from Freeport proper and from other communities.
Correct. And there is an interim solution of powering East Grand Bahama now, where temporary generation will be placed at Equinor, and that's going to help feed East Grand Bahama. A lot of work has gone into it up to now. We're going to see significant changes in terms of power availability in East Grand Bahama as of March, but they fully expect that East Grand Bahama will be powered fully by May.
Does that include Sweeting Ski as well?
It includes East Grand Bahama and Sweeting Ski.
Okay. What about the power generation in Abaco? That is a critical concern. A lot of people have said to me, we can't move forward without power. Can you give us an assessment on where we are?
Well, I know BPL had powered up to the Spring City area, and I know that they're consistently working. I think people are probably more surprised at how BPL has been working. That's kind of the comments I've been getting on the ground in Abaco. But Marsh Harbor is a big problem in central Abaco. And BPL is continuing to work. But, we also do have a debris issue in certain areas. And that's also a bone of contention with many residents. We are actively looking at the contracts for debris removal in Grand Bahama and Abaco. We're looking at those terms of references. We're also looking at the islands geographically, because clearly there were some gaps, and there are certain areas both on Grand Bahama and Abaco that have not been contracted and are not being cleaned. And so the authority is doing its due diligence now on that issue.
In terms of the domes, I mean, the Abaco is to receive and has started receiving these domes. I want to talk about sort of who's eligible, are they paying rent, how long do they intend to be there, and then sort of what happens to them at the end of this whole process.
Well, if you look at the structure of the domes, they look like you just screw them in, and so I suppose at the end of it, these are things that can be stored somewhere and be used again. And as you know, there are about 11 domes that have been erected in Spring City. They expect by January 23rd, some more domes will be completed, and the strategy is for the 40 in Spring City to be ready to go. There is some delay in the erection of the domes. I do believe the authority or the government expected by now that these domes would have had more domes on the ground. But the process, I understand, is you're a Bahamian citizen. You have to provide documents to show that you were living in a house on August 29th that was obviously destroyed by the hurricane, and your house and property must be have been described as severely damaged. And those would be the qualifications for people to get dome housing.
And you're allowed to live in them rent-free?
Oh, no, nobody's renting. How you could be renting? Where did you get that from?
I just asked. But is there a fee, or you just once you're eligible, you just
once you're eligible? I mean, Jesus, if people don't have anywhere to live, I can't imagine how you do that. But bear in mind who you're talking about. You're talking about severely damaged or destroyed people. I mean, persons' homes that were severely damaged or destroyed. The other thing is, you know, there's not a lot of talk about East Grand Bahama. The authority recognized that that was a gap where we needed to identify quickly also temporary housing for East Grand Bahama, and we're doing that. We do have a donor, MSC, who is donating some temporary housing for Grand Bahama. We're trying to quickly assess what we need in East Grand Bahama. I know that the first group, the first set of temporary housing looks to be about 50 to 100. So we need to get those people whose homes were destroyed in temporary housing right away.
Another area of concern, and it's an ongoing area, has to do with the folks in the shelters. There are people who are still being housed in the shelter. Again, you know, what is the short-term, long-term plan? What's going to happen with those individuals?
Well, from what I understand, I mean, I know that there's still people in the shelters, and that is something that both NEMA and the authority are looking at the moment. Definitive resolution about the Kendall Isaacs gym, where most of the people are. Really I can't answer you what definitively the end result is going to be at the moment. But we are reviewing that.
Okay.
Because the gym is in bad shape, first of all, from what I understand. And obviously use of the gym needs to be made with who normally uses the gym.
Right. It's a sporting facility.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult
Does
thing.
that come under the authority? I mean, that's more of a humanitarian, but will you have sort of view of that as well?
Yes. Yes, helping to resolve that as well.
Okay. I would like to know sort of what your view and that of the authority is over the next 2 years. What can we expect to see happening in these affected areas in the next 2 years?
Well, I think what you have to look at is, first of all, as I started, all of the persons who would have had minimal to medium type damages to their homes, within 6 months, these people should be back in their homes. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking to make sure that in the shortest space of time, we can get people back in their homes whose damages really were at a minimal to kind of medium range. I think that persons whose homes have been severely impacted, it's going to take a little bit longer. Persons' homes that have been destroyed, I think 2 years from now, what we would want to see is, and we are investigating it now, different types of construction that speak to the whole issue of resiliency. We'd like to see within the next 2 years some of these houses going up all around the country. Abaco, Grand Bahama, East Grand Bahama, particularly Sweeting's Key, in the Keys of Abaco. So in 2 years we need to be seeing viable construction completed in some instances. And I think if we are diligent and we focus where we need to focus, I think we will see a lot of that going on in the country. And that should also include additions to public areas as well.
Finally, are we going to see a lot of policies changed, updated, as it relates to the reconstruction? For instance, we will talk briefly about the building codes. I think the director would have indicated that those codes have not been updated in over a decade. And then you've got policies related to the environment and things of those nature. And I think maybe that would fall more under the ministry.
That's exactly where it sits.
So will we see those, and will you be making recommendations into the ministry on things of that nature as well?
I think so. I think, first of all, I think that's the role of the ministry in terms of setting the overall policy on things like the building code. And let's face it, the building code in the Bahamas is pretty strong.
Sure.
I think that, yes, there may have to be some slight changes to the building code, but we all know the problem rests in enforcement and inspection. That's what we see. But as we do this work as the authority, there's a number of things that we are seeing and we will come in contact with that we need to make suggestions for. For example, things like landfills. You know, the landfill, I even shouldn't call it a landfill. The dump site in Abaco, that's not operating properly. It's operating as a dump site. So as the authority does its work, there are some recommendations and some things the authority must do. And we have to look at the landfill for Abaco. We have to look at a landfill probably for East Grand Bahama, and maybe a solution for West Grand Bahama. So these things have come up as a result of the work that we are doing, and also the massive debris that's on the ground in the country.
Yes. We are at the end of our discussion. Kay, I want to thank you for coming and spending this time with us and helping us to understand. This is such a complex issue, and it is really, you know, we've said it over and over, it's by no stretch of the imagination a sprint. This is a marathon,
right,
and a long one. And, you know, you and the authority have a lot of work to do. Thank you for helping to explain some of the things that are happening, and certainly we'll be talking to you a lot more and trying to help to even showcase some of the work that the authority is doing. And so thank you for your service, and thank you for stopping by.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and I just want to leave by saying that I know one of the big issues has been the level of communication to the public. Mm-hmm. We've started a series of town meetings. We're going to work our way all through Abaco and Grand Bahama with town meetings, explaining to people the benefits that they can deserve through the small business unit, through social services, and through inland revenue. And the authority will be setting up a very structured communication plan to make sure that the people who are affected in this country are informed.
Good news. Glad to hear it. Thank you so very much. Well, that's going to do it for our show today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks very much to my special guest tonight, Katherine Forbes-Smith, also to my technical team, and of course to you, our audience. We look forward to having you again next week. But until then, stay tuned via our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and certainly YouTube. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place, right here.